Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome
Hi.
to the Meeta and Tosh show. You're here with Meeta Swami of the main group and Tosh Paul-Petier of Astute HR. So this afternoon is all about redundancies and restructure. We're a month in, 6 weeks in to the lockdown, and what a ride it's been. We thought that by popular demand from our audience here on the webinar series, and also from the conversations that Tosh and I are both having out into the business world, that this was a really relevant topic. And the reason being that we all know that the furloughing support and the retention scheme, business retention scheme, has helped us delay redundancies. But just looking at some stats today, Tosh, I just thought I'd read some stats out to everyone. We know that BA are planning 12,000 redundancies in the industry. 2/3 have already furloughed staff. 50% are planning redundancies. And when I looked at the CIPD today, over 50% are planning to furlough and consider redundancies. So the job retention scheme really has just delayed the thinking and the planning around how organizations get back out of this and how we manage our talent in that time.
It's a prop. It's a prop up at the moment, Meeta. That's all it is. It's not looking to delay anything or anything like that. What it's looking to do is just put a little support, just some sort of measure in place to avoid people being made redundant en masses. Obviously, things keep getting extended, and the uncertainty of the current situation means that people are worried about making redundancies. Companies as well as employees making redundancies. Do we go furlough? Do we not go furlough? Can I be made redundant whilst I'm on furlough? All sorts of different things like that to decide. But at the end of the day, from the employer's point of view, they've got to decide whether they're going to survive, thrive, or die. And it's going to be one of those three scenarios. And obviously, one of the options that may have to be open to the employer will be to start to affect redundancies for employees. They need to do cutbacks. Remember, furloughing is a voluntary arrangement between the employer and the employee. So if that scheme no longer is in place, companies are going to have to make some really tough decisions.
Yeah. Well, at the moment, we've got the job retention scheme available till June. Again, being a statistic fiend today, I found out from a search on the CIPD that over 60% would like to see that extend till September. And I say here. Again, we don't really have a clear way out. So I think what's really important, going into today, our topics are going to cover, first and foremost, redundancy and restructure, what we need to be thinking about when we're planning it, what the legalities are around that. And once we've got a line of sight on what that looks like, how organizations thrive. We have, what do they say, adapt or die? Sounds extreme, but in this market, it really is those that adapt the fastest that are going to be successful. So we're hoping that our webinars, and we want to be really candid with both business owners as well as professional advisors out to the market, and we can just take you on our journey and our knowledge that we glean from the work that we're doing in this time. So
what Meeta and I were doing this was to put a lot of information out there for people just to be helpful at this time. Okay, there's no catch, there's nothing else in it, and genuinely the topics have to be something that are of interest to you. So when you're getting emails from us, please do reply to us, tell us what matters to you, because then we can find out whatever the answers are, whatever the problems are. Everyone's got questions, and people like us have answers, quite frankly, for those questions. So, please use us if I can use that phrase. Horrible, sounds horrible, doesn't it? Use us and feel free to ask any questions. And there's a chat box here on the right as well. Don't wait till the end. We'll be checking those pages as we talk through this 30-minute session or so. And then we'll check at the end. And what we always do, for those that don't know, is Meeta and I answer every single question. And if we don't get through all of the questions that are put in the chat box during this session, we'll do a follow-up video which will guarantee all answers for everything. Okay, so I thought I'd better that there.
Absolutely. So these are Q&A sessions, as Tosh has said. We've got a hi from Jo Ellen from Impact Factory. Hi, Jo Ellen. I know a lot of you have attended a lot of these sessions, and we've got some new people as well. So welcome to everyone. Tosh, shall we start by thinking about why an organization would be considering redundancy and restructure at this time? There's an extra R, actually. There's also redeployment. One of the things that we're really understanding is that for organizations to really make good choices at this time, it's really key for senior members of the team to all be aligned. So whether that's finance, HR, CEO and strategy and operations, everybody needs to be on the same page so they can really understand the impact of each element for the organization going forward. You almost need to look at what you want the future to look like and work backwards, and then think about the staff you need in place to affect that outcome for the organization.
I think people are dealing with the situation as if they're preparing for the worst, but hoping for the best. I think it's the best way to look at it. Obviously, you've got to be ready and prepared for what happens if the scheme does fall away. I think, and I don't have any inside information, I think that won't happen because the whole economy will just collapse. So we can't have that in the situation, clearly. So I think that's unlikely. But you're right. Let's start off with perhaps what a redundancy is, so that employers can decide when that situation arises or not. So the government scheme as it currently stands is there to obviously as an alternative to redundancy, right? Because if it didn't exist, everyone's just going to lose their jobs. Everyone loses their jobs. Businesses are closing down. It just doesn't work. So it's a little, finger into the blocking the water leak, whatever it is, sort of scenario. Redundancy happens in one of three situations. So I'll break it down in really sort of simple terms. There's no longer a requirement for a job of a particular kind. That is a redundancy. Doesn't matter about job titles. It matters about the work. Okay. So work of a particular kind is no longer required. That happens in three situations. Number one, the business closes down entirely, so everybody loses their job. Number two, there's less work available, so you need less staff to do the work that's coming in. And number three is where there's a restructure. So perhaps it might be more efficient systems, or computerization, or automation of systems, or what have you, so that you can have less staff doing the same amount of work. So it might be improved efficiencies. So it's complete closure, it's a restructure, or there's less work coming in. Those are the three situations where there's a genuine redundancy.
Yeah. Okay.
And for employees with less than 2 years, employers are not obligated to go through a redundancy process.
Yeah.
They're only entitled to, and the employees are not entitled to redundancy pay either. They've got to have at least 2 years service.
So, got a question for you, which I have been asked to me, and I thought I'm going to save it for this Q&A session. So at the moment, we're in May. Organizations are already looking at they're almost considering the furlough and redundancy option in parallel. Yes. So in previous Q&As, you've mentioned that there is a scenario where if the job retention scheme ends in June, people could be then made redundant in June. Would the furlough period cover a notice period, or would the notice period be after the furlough period?
There's no reason it can't be during the furlough, but the notice period can't start during the furlough. It's the truth of the situation. Whether it's a genuine redundancy or not, obviously it will presumably have to be retracted if the scheme continues. Yeah, it's an alternative redundancy, which I was saying earlier. 2 years really for all employers. I always say this as clients. First thing is, employees have rights after 2 years. There are some exceptions for discrimination laws and automatically unfair reasons I won't go into it right now. But if it's more than 2 years service, you've got an obligation to have a fair reason for redundancy, which is one of the three things I've said. And you also need to have a fair process. That process, I'm just going to break down very quickly for you, number one is meaningful consultation. In English, that just means talk to your staff about what is happening, why it's happening, how much you're going to get, all that sort of stuff. The minimum consultation period for less than 20 employees that could be at risk of redundancy, there isn't one. Okay. It's whatever is reasonable. Lawyers love that word. We can sit there arguing what reasonable is forever. So it's whatever is reasonable. Normally,
there's no minimum period of time.
Exactly. The longer the period, the more reasonable it's going to be, isn't it? So, but generally speaking, a couple of weeks will probably do the job. If there are 20 to 99 employees that are going to be made redundant, then you are looking at a minimum consultation period of 30 days. Yeah. And if it is over 100 employees that are being made redundant, you're looking at a minimum consultation period of 45 days. So that's number one. You've got to have meaningful consultation. Number two, you have to have a fair selection criteria. Why is that person being selected for redundancy? Number three, you need to look at suitable alternative employment. Redundancy has to be the last reasonable resort. So before this furloughing was in place, that would have been it. If there's no suitable alternative employment, you'll be looking straight away at redundancy. Now, whilst this isn't tested, obviously, because it's all brand new, now I'm going to suggest that it would be reasonable to put an employee on furlough as an alternative to redundancy, which is what the scheme is anyway, And if that isn't considered, that might be an unfair dismissal. But otherwise, if you've considered all of those options, then redundancy is the last reasonable resort, and it will be a fair redundancy in law.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of a selection process, this is something I know that we've got guides going out to everyone at the end of the session. You're doing a redundancy guide. Will there be some guidance on what the selection process should look like in that?
There isn't in that particular guide. In fact, it's more about the processes. But the selection criteria is fairly straightforward. We don't need to overcomplicate it. The selection criteria is how do you decide the best person for the job? That's it. What measurable or objective criteria can you have? A lot of people, it might be targets, right? How much money does the employee bring in? But there might be other factors. What are the factors that you look at when you're doing a job interview? What are the skill sets? But the difference is it's not like a job interview because you know that person, you know what they've delivered. So you can actually apply what their skill sets are. For me, for my lawyers, for example, it might be how many cases do they win? Not just fee earning, or not who's the best fee earners, but how much cases they win. How do they deal with queries? How many webinars do they do? Or whatever it is that matters to me as a business. And then you score that.
What's really key is the consistency and the clarity in having notes for everything, isn't it?
Correct.
Because that really is what separates a really smooth process that is unquestionable to perhaps if an employee feels that there is a grievance, then it will come back to the record. So it's really key to have clarity and everything noted. I mean, from a business perspective, I know you're the expert, Tosh, but from our perspective, those basics really help. Actually, I've got a question for you, Tosh, which is from Helen. Helen says, can people on furlough leave be an employee rep for part of the consultation? Oh, interesting.
No reason why not. Obviously, consultation will happen completely differently now, won't it? Consultation will not be done face-to-face. So it will be done through Skype or Zoom or however things of that nature are conducted. Same thing applies with disciplining employees. That can still happen right now as well. How do you hold a disciplinary meeting now? Well, it will be through Zoom, through Skype, or whatever medium you're using, right? One thing I wanted to just go back slightly, Meeta, was about the selection criteria. I know you focused on what should be in there. I'd like you to think about it the other way, what shouldn't be in there. So make sure there aren't criteria that could be regarded as being discriminatory. For example, if you apply sickness absence and that then is applied to somebody who's disabled, that could be disability discrimination. So maybe that person would then be disregarded for that purpose of that score, or get a maximum score just to avoid any discrimination issue, or avoid that as being a criteria. So those sorts of things obviously can't be in there. But otherwise, just focus on what you need as a business. Forget the law, and that's a very unlawyer-like thing to say. Forget the law. What do you need your people to have? What skill set? Who are the best people? How do you decide that, and how can you show that?
Yeah. Okay.
Because the ones that aren't selected obviously might challenge that.
Yes. So I've got another question. Let's see what Simon says. So Simon asks, if you have some people who have worked less than 2 years and others who have worked more than 2 years, do you then include everyone in the process?
You don't have to, Simon. The law applies to the requirement to follow the process is 2 years service or not. The reason being is employees can't claim unfair dismissal until they've acquired 2 years service. There's no legal jurisdiction. That's why I'm saying that. So that means even if you do it completely unfairly, I'm not advocating you do that, but it's a choice. Even if you decide to not go through the process because you just haven't got the time, there are business decisions to be made, you can literally do it over the phone, quite frankly, as long as you discharge their legal obligations. That means their notice pay, their salary up to the termination date, outstanding holiday pay, and any other contractual obligations that might apply.
Yeah. And don't forget, everyone is accruing holiday as standard through the furlough period. So there will be, if there are redundancies, there will be calculations to consider in that as well.
That's right. That's right.
And would redundancy pay be based on the furlough amount or the normal basic, Tosh?
Redundancy pay should be calculated on your normal salary.
Fine.
Obviously, if they're giving you notice during your furlough period, then you'll be receiving your furlough pay during the notice period.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting stuff. So the other area that we wanted to talk about, which is really intertwined with redundancy and restructure, is considering redeployment. I think if organizations are thinking strategically about what their future looks like, how they're going to adapt. I heard about secret escapes. They are selling holidays. They can no longer sell holidays. They are now selling homeware and photos for the house. I mean,
all right.
But because they've got such a strong database of customers out there, they've literally switched. And they're going to start creating some success from that. So it really is about being innovative. And when you look at your people, really do make sure that you have a meeting of minds from the senior team, work backwards. As I've already said, something we're doing with clients is almost being like a bit of a coach in that time. So creating a list of questions that really should be considered. And I'm actually going to provide a free guide around how to deal with that process, and then also how to manage your organization's PR, because again, we can see that, business and the not-for-profit organizations, the market out there is very cyclical. Right now, unfortunately, redundancies are going to be on everyone's lips, but pretty soon the market will shift and we'll start hiring again. So the PR of your brand, the internal and external message is so key. And again, we've been talking to a lot of clients about outplacement. So for those of you who don't know, some of you may, some of you might not, so many call it different things, but outplacement is really, it goes hand in hand with redundancy, and it's how you manage the message. It's a cost that the company bears. It's not a lot of money, but what it does is for anybody that is made redundant, they are given the support by organizations like ourselves. It doesn't have to be us, it can be anyone out there who does that, but it's everything around helping them offboard, could be exit interviews, helping them gain the confidence of the transition, coaching them in that time, getting them a CV, getting them an up-to-date CV, and then helping them with going and applying for new jobs and finding that new role. And I think that is part of the responsibility at the moment of organizations who want to make sure that they are always going to be an employer brand of choice. And so that's something we've really been advising out there to consider.
How do they do that now, Meeta? So if employers are there looking at outplacement services, obviously people they're looking at probably cutting costs at the moment wherever they can do. Mm-hmm. What are you suggesting that they do right now, and why would that help them now, do you think?
Well, I think it's, as I said, it's really key to align who they're making redundant with outplacement services and supporting the exiting employees at the same time. So if that was us helping, we would still talk to, could be the CEO, it could be the owner, it could be head of people, and talking to them about who they're going to outplace. And then we would go into this and talk to those individuals about how we can support them. Right now, that would be done on Skype. But it's so key that the people you're keeping in the organization feel as supported as the people that you're exiting. And often that is how organizations conduct themselves. I say this all the time, in the good times, everyone can have a really positive vibe, great culture, everyone feels supported and looked after. But it's in the challenging times. So when an organization is dealing with redundancy, how do the people that stay really feel? Do they feel secure? Do they feel bought into? Do they feel that they're staying in the right organization and ready to do their best? So it's two sides. One is organizational adaptation, restructure, yes, and survival for the future. And the other is the cultural impact of what you're doing. And that's where I think outplacement support really enhances the organization as it will look going forward. And all those people that leave with positive footprints, and wherever they go, will feel that they've been looked after in that process. And that will only come back round to organizations, because as we said,
makes sense. We're getting a lot of people at the moment, Meeta, that are approaching us, whether they're companies or employees, and they're doing what are called settlement agreements, which are basically legally binding documents to sort of bring the employment relationship to an end. It's very common in a redundancy situation, and it's very common in that to have outplacement services within those agreements. So if you are a company that is looking at doing settlement agreements with your staff, contact us. Meeta and I will both be able to help you with those things, either from the outplacement point of view or even on the settlement agreement point of view. Or even if you just want to know what to do, if some of these things are not clear, then just reach out to us. Our details are available with this recording and everything we send you anyway.
Yeah. So one of the things that we do to support organizations and individuals in that process is also probably very useful is this employability report. It can tell any individual, we do a survey of the market, and you can tell any individual how long it will take them to find another role. Now, again, in these times, any period of time will probably double, if not triple. But again, it allows organizations to have sensible, objective conversations rather than it being a subjective feeling from an employee who can then become disgruntled in the process. So as much clarity and objectivity that we can put into that process the better the outcomes are going to be for the organizations having to deal with this difficult topic and in a difficult time.
You know, one of the things, Meeta, you were talking about earlier, which is also the second part of our discussion anyway, was about thriving in the workplace rather than just sort of surviving. And we were discussing this earlier. And the key is obviously adapting to the circumstances. The ones that adapt, you know, I know we have not had a pandemic before in our lifetime, but this isn't the first time we've had experienced a situation where businesses have crashed or there's been a major upheaval, whether it's, you know, stock market crashes or even the, you know, birth of the internet. You know, loads of businesses had to adapt, and those that didn't obviously just fell by the wayside. So you really need to just be thinking about what that means. How are you offering your services right now? How are you offering your products? I mean, your example earlier was a perfect one, you know, from holiday star to, what was it, home products?
Household products.
Yeah,
I mean, not but, you know, photos and sofas and, you know, people are adapting. I was just going to say, we've got a comment from Vivian who, thank you, Vivian. Vivian says that it's absolutely right that two lots of redundancy processes, both dealt one positively, one negatively. And at the main group, what we really want to ensure is that the life cycle of the talent in your world is exactly what you as an organization want. So how you treat people in the exit will reflect so much more to the people that remain, and they will work so much harder for you if you get that right. So we can help you with that. The guides will help you. I'm just talking to people. This isn't about, for Tosh and I, this isn't about fees or anything like that. We just want to share what we're learning and give you some support, because it you know, we're all remote, but it also feels every organization thinks, are we doing the right thing? So hopefully this can bring together the thinking that's out there in the world, you know?
Yeah.
We've got a question from Lorraine, Josh. It says, an employee on short-term contract is due to end in a few weeks. Can they be furloughed?
If you're going to extend that, yes. If you're talking about now, until the contract is due to come in, yes, as well. As long as the criteria for furloughing exists. We've done that in previous talks, but very briefly, they've got to be on your PAYE payroll system as of the 19th of March.
Yeah.
There's other criteria, but that's the key thing.
The 19th.
Yes, correct. So the answer is yes, they can, Lorraine.
I tell you what, Tosh, I'm actually going to ask you a question that we've come across. And it's because we predominantly, a big part of our work is attracting talent into organizations. On the temporary side, we know that the government have extended the furlough scheme to temps. So if they were employed on the 19th of March, they are entitled to be furloughed. But one of the challenges that has arisen is that some of them were only going to be in a week or two booking, but you can only be furloughed for a minimum of 3 weeks. So how would something like that work? Well,
it works that they either stay on the basis, so you're going to extend their temporary contract on that, on whatever basis that would be, or you don't, because the minimum period is 3 weeks.
Yeah. So if somebody was working on the 19th of March, they finished first week of April, say it was just under 2 weeks, and we want to go back and put them on furlough, we can't, can we? Because it wasn't 3 weeks.
Correct, yeah, they're absolutely clear. The minimum furlough period is 3 weeks. So you can, but then you're going to keep them on there based on whatever their normal pay would be during that period. So I suppose it depends what the temporary arrangement is, right? If it's just a series of that going on after the other, you can obviously show a pattern. If it isn't, then that's just not going to work, is it?
Yeah, no, it's really tough. And we just want to help everyone out there have some continuity and some financial security, but there are so many gaps that haven't really been thought through. But again, Tosh, you and I always say that this is still a fantastic scheme from the government, and we all put our hands up to say that
it's the best in the world. Just so we're clear about that, it's the absolute best in the world. In the US, I think they're covering 30%, something like that, of people's salary. It's unheard of. 80% is huge.
50 million people lost their job in the last few weeks. I mean, it's scary.
Exactly. So we've got to do that. So it's the best in the world at the moment, and how long it goes for will be dependent on how long we need to do it, I suppose.
Yeah, indeed. Hence why we're doing weekly Q&As, so that as
it's so rapidly, isn't it, Meeta? So we've got to keep putting stuff out there, and people want to know stuff. And also, there's just so much stuff out there. I mean, people are probably sick of some of these, webinars or email updates, because they don't know which one to go to. But once you picked one and you know what the information is, it just makes sense to keep going back there. So we'll keep doing this as long as it's useful to everybody that's listening, quite frankly.
Thank you. We've got a question from Sam. Can you end fixed-term contracts in the furlough period?
Okay, that's a bit of a loaded question, Sam, because it's not yes and no. So, so number one is if the fixed term contract was due to end anyway, that's fine. If it is more than 2 years, employment rights still are in place. So you have to have a reason, real good reason to end it. Even just because it says at the end of the fixed term doesn't make it so. You can have a contract for 10 years, for example, but if it isn't based on something like the completion of a project or something like that, then that's not correct. So can you end fixed term contracts in the furlough period? Yes, depending on those sorts of factors, and also depending on what it says in the contract. Because if they don't have what's called some sort of a break clause, which is like a notice period, well, that means you'd have to end up paying them for the remainder of the fixed term contract. Or if there's a break clause which gives a notice period, then you can just give them that notice.
Yeah. It's it really is all around understanding that whether they're furloughed or not, they're still treated with the same process as they would be if they were in
correct. Exactly right. All their rights are remaining in place. The only thing the furlough does is differentiating the way that they're being paid during that period.
Yeah.
Really?
Absolutely.
So we can't do any work for the employer as well.
No, I mean, it's been it's a 30-minute session, as we said. We tend to extend it if there are more questions. At the moment, there aren't more questions. So I think what I'd really like to wind up with, Tosh, is that we've had a thank you from Lorraine. Lorraine, thank you. As we've said, it really is what you want from these sessions. We try to keep them succinct because, weirdly, even though we're all remote and we don't have as much of a commute anymore, we're still super busy. So we want to give you the information in a really succinct way. We'll make sure that the guides are available to you. But also, we want to say that just pick up the phone, drop us an email, log in on here, and we can hopefully guide you. You're not alone. Sometimes we can feel alone, and that's why we just wanted to create a community who can all support each other, ask questions that the other organisation hadn't thought of, and that's really powerful in this. Is companies saying, "Oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that." So as long as you need this, we'd really like to keep it going. But
really nice messages there as well from people. Thank you very much. We need to know that it's working for you and useful for you, so we keep doing it. And also, look, if you feel shy to ask a question here, I know we keep saying it, call us. No problem at all. And also, what would be really, Meeta, and I would really like to know is what else you'd like us to talk about. We'll keep coming up with the topics. As Meeta said, we're suffering the same pains that you are. We're also running businesses and dealing with employee issues and whatever else we have going on that you do. So it's practical as well as just what the law says. It's a bit of a combination of all the different skill sets is what we're looking to do. So we'll keep putting them out there, but please do interact with us and let us know what you want, what information is helpful.
Yeah, there's something I do want to mention actually, because the client actually did exactly that. They called me with a payroll query. They actually did have somebody who was temping, and they decided that they wanted to furlough them, and they really wanted to understand how we can payroll them based on whether you pay it all and then claim the 80 back, or if you only then charge the 20% through the payroll services. So that's a question I've had twice now. So within a week, if a couple of clients are having that challenge, it may be something you guys are having as well. So if you have any queries around how to payroll, how to manage invoicing from suppliers, we're providing payroll services as well around that. So we are au fait with the best way forward on that. So, please don't hesitate to ask.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening. As you said, you'll get a recording of this sent to you shortly. I'm going to be adding also another video I did on redundancies and a how-to guide in terms of how to do the redundancies. That will be added. Meeta, you're going to add something too, aren't you?
Yeah, so I'm going to add the strategic questions that your organisation should be thinking about asking when considering redundancies, redeployment and restructure, and then about outplacement. So here's the problem with the challenge, here's what we need to be asking, but then here's the cultural impact. Let's part with positive footprint. So the brand, the PR of the brand and the communication is really aligned and sets you in good stead going forward.
I'm sorry, I just had to mention that. James is listening from Nigeria. We've gone global, Meeta.
Yay!
Success, at last.
Well, we love everyone who's signed in, near or far. We just want to help. So
high five, Meeta. We're doing that. All right, everybody. Thank you very much again, and we'll see you next week. Except it will be a new time. We'll be doing it from 11 o'clock. We'll be looking at doing that every single Friday for you.
So please let us know what you want to hear. We look forward to seeing you then.
Take care. Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.